think my up and down caused you could hear me sometimes, not hear me the other times. So if you can't hear me, you need to take. Okay? So if Dawn always gets what she dreams, she's got Ron now. What does that say? Awesome. Awesome. If I tend to lean a little bit this way, it's because Dan and Jolene moved to the other side of the tracks, and it keeps me moving. It's kind of imbalanced. So welcome to the other side, guys. It's a lot of fun over there. All right? I looked up and saw them. I'm like, what? What happened? What happened? Is that what it is? I got you. Okay. Don't feel bad, the selves. I mean, it's just, yeah, it is what it is. So, all right, I'm going to try to run it from back here with my iPad. I haven't done that in a while, so if I make a mistake, please just bear with me. Usually I kind of, well, at least I think I do, come up with kind of my own subject matter. So this is kind of a first for me where the pastor hands me something and says, okay, this is the format of which I'd like you to do it. Here's the subject I'd like you to talk about. Now just sound like me. I don't know that I can do that. He's a lot smarter than I am in this area at least, if not in many others. I will do my absolute best, so bear with me. So in keeping with what we did last week, we're going to read Daniel chapter 2. So I'll give you just a second to kind of get your bearings. And in the meantime, if you can do this with your fingers, I'm going to actually open up with some prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so very much for the opportunity to stand before you. Lord, I'd ask that you bless me. I don't know that this is your will to have me there, but here I am. Left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians and the astrologers, the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, which ironically was kind of the language there was a Babylonian language, but the upper echelon spoke Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said to his Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut to pieces, and your houses shall be made as an ash heap. However, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill him. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is this decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes the kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were in bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what it will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me, because I have more wisdom than anyone living. But for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest, arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, and where the beasts of the field and the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand, and he has made you ruler over all of them. You are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, the third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. Like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break into pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw in the iron mixed with the ceramic clay. As the toes of feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. That's a pretty awesome thing, isn't it? You know, as I was studying and preparing, you know, I have kind of my own unique way of doing things, and I was kind of down a pathway, and then my wife said, you know, this is really the bedrock of our church. Nothing like a little pressure. Nothing like saying, dude, if you mess this up, you know. But fortunately for me, My job here today isn't to be a Bible scholar. My job here today is to teach you something you already know. This has been reviewed, studied. People much smarter than I have spent a great deal of time understanding what these things mean. But I'm yet just a simple man. And in my simplicity, I continuously and always go back to a single kind of environment. And that is just simply God's love for me. Today I want to spend a little bit of time and I want to touch on 3 points. God's love for us, the sovereignty of God, and the will of God. Because you already know what our belief system, what our church, what our Bible scholars and the Adventist faith think about, look about in this word, this dream, and how it really has such an impact on us today. Would you agree? Do you know the stories? Do you know the interpretations? But when I read this, and I've read this over and over and over again, I just keep going back to, God used dreams, much like the people believed then that their gods, lowercase g, used dreams to talk to them, to share with them what their life was like. It's unique that Nebuchadnezzar in this particular instance was either one, wise and recognizing that maybe he could be taken advantage of, or 2, God gave him a dream and then took it from him so that he would not be fooled. If you watch TV or you see the activities of things in life, you wonder, how does a person come to that understanding? But if you watch human nature and where you get the psychics of our day, is that they don't tell you the future, they tell you what you want to hear. You noticed? But Nebuchadnezzar, either again in his wisdom or the infinite wisdom of God by taking the dream from him, did not allow the wise men and the soothsayers and the Chaldeans to be able to use what he said and make their own interpretation. Now, obviously, that upset Nebuchadnezzar because he was asking the people that he listened to on a regular basis. Now, you can only imagine the people he would call to the table there were people of whom he had great faith in, that he saw as his leaders of wise men. These were not the nurses that graduated last week. These were not the doctors who just got out of residency that he was asking to take care of him. These are these old curmudgeonly people. Been around the block for a while, right? And he brought them in. Now, he'd been listening to them. I'm guessing this was in like the 2nd or 3rd year of his rule, right? So he's been listening to them for a couple of years now. And again, whether he was wise or God's wisdom overcame, they were not able to answer his question. Tell me the dream. Now that had a, for every action there is a sure and definitive reaction, right? His sure and definitive reaction was wipe these guys off the face of the earth. Now, it's believed, at least in my readings, that Daniel wasn't still in training, but he was the nurse who just graduated last week or the doctor who just got a residency. He was young. His friends were young, which is probably why he wasn't initially brought to the table. Now, up to this point, he really hadn't exercised too much of his faith in God. I mean, he had, but he had not shown that to the king. Last week we talked a little about their diet and kind of how they turned out to be healthier and more robust because of the choices they made. They started to lay a groundwork of conviction. And we know through the rest of Daniel, there's a number of times now that he stands and puts God before the king, which most kings that I've ever known, don't tell anybody, but CEOs, maybe a few CNOs, they got a little ego going for them. They don't like it when you put someone else before them, right? But Daniel repetitively did that. In this case, it's a little bit different because he wasn't given the really opportunity to put God before king, but yet he was getting ready to suffer the consequences of the king's power. See, and this is where God's love for us comes in. See, we have to get the opportunity to see that God is always paying attention. Now, if you can imagine, you're charged with, and I'm sure no one here has ever been, you're charged with taking out a bunch of people. Now, in interpretations, you kind of get the idea that even the king really didn't want to do this, but he was upset. We do things when we're upset. We say things that we don't always mean when we're upset, or we take a very harsh reaction when we're upset, and quite possibly Nebuchadnezzar took a very harsh reaction. He was very troubled by this dream. He was very uneasy. Something didn't set right. And so he was very emotionally tied to this concept. And as Arioch is coming through the town, taking people out, I am kind of amazed that he didn't just take Daniel out. That there was an opportunity for Daniel to say, whoa, hold on. What's going on? Why are you doing this? Arioch then had the opportunity to tell him. Ask the king for reprieve. Let me go see the king. Now, he was of some status. We know historically that you just don't walk into the king's office and say, yo, dude. Right? You have to be invited. In Esther's time, that was pretty clear, right? You have to show certain homage before you're allowed. You have to request audience with the king. But it kind of gives you the impression in what we just read that he went to the king. Just the amount of faith that Daniel just expressed, not in the king, but in God. Because there's no real indication here that he had a conversation with God that said, God, if I go in there and tell him to hang on just a minute, will you help me out? He didn't, did he? He just went. Shows up the king and says, give me some time. Now it says earlier that they were trying to gain time. But see, the king caught them trying to gain time. He didn't like that. But Daniel came straight to him and said, I need some time. Honesty, transparency, values that we appreciate. Went to the king and said, give me some time and I'll come back. He didn't say, give me time, I'll see if I can figure it out. Give me some time and I will bring back to you your dream and its interpretation. Amazing faith. Because his head was on the chopping block. Not just his head. All of his appendages. To cut into pieces mean they dismembered them. They were not particularly nice people. There was nothing humane about it. So he goes back. We know that part of the story. God gives him in his own night vision what I would translate to be in his own dream, and shares with him not just the dream, but its interpretation. And you notice that Daniel has a connection with God. Because he wakes up and he doesn't say, thanks God. He goes, I got this now. I can take care of this. He wakes up and before his feet hit the floor, he does what? He praises God. He gives God all the credit. He says, thank you. He doesn't even take the credit for himself. See, Daniel is who it got revealed to, but he's got 3 buddies. Any of you got some buddies? You just don't really, wherever you are, so they may shall be. You got some buddies. Growing up, you're in a little pack. I'm looking at kind of a pack right back there of our young folks. We got a little pack. Last week, we had the opportunity to have McKenna live with us. She came to visit her grandpa and live with us. And I saw more of Matthew and more of Sierra than I have in a while because they're a pack. All right? They're all doing this. They're all doing that. He had his pack. He had his bros, his homies. And he gave them all. He brought them all with him. And not only did he do that, he asked for the lives of all the liars too. Please stop. I've got the message you're asking for. I've got what you need. Please stop. Stop killing all your wise men. Whether they're wise or not, please stop. And even in the process, and you kind of have a little bit of cringe factor when he says that no man knows your dream. I have told you I'm going to go and come back with the interpretation and your dream, but oh, by the way, I don't know it. I am not wise. His job title was wise man. I'm not wise, but my God knows. My God has shared with me your information. So I am not but just a vessel of what God has for you. And so he tells him the dream. See, God is always keeping an eye on us. Sabbath school, we're talking about this book. It's called Experiencing God. It talks a lot about the will of God. And Dan summed it up well by saying, God will take the lemons that we create and make lemonade. See, he is never apart from us. He is always there with us. No matter what we do, he is still guiding us. Sometimes even we don't want him to. Sometimes he keeps us. Gwen brought up driving down the road, and I'm not sure. I'm gonna add some to what you said this morning. She was encountered by a car who was taking their half of the road out of the middle. You ever been there? And if you've ever been out where they live, and Chuck, you're in it too, their half is like 80% of the road. Because the roads out there don't have a full 100%, right? They're only like 75 to 80% at best. And so when they're taking their 50%, it does not leave a lot of room for you. Even we don't have a chance to ask for God's guidance, God's safety. I don't know, Gwen, maybe you did pray before you got behind the wheel this morning and drove to church, or if you were like me, you were just trying to get out the door and you really didn't even think about God. Just got behind the wheel. You know? But God has a way. He doesn't really actually need you. He doesn't really actually need me. But he loves me. He loves me so much that he doesn't need me to ask for anything. He just does it. He takes care of me. Which leads me into the point 2, the sovereignty of God. God gave him the dream. God created an environment where he couldn't get his wise men to tell him the dream. See, God's making a statement here. Because God can do that. Right? He's saying that I'm getting ready to bestow on you wisdom that you don't have capacity to understand. I am moved by the way this is stated and even the words. Now, I believe the Bible is inspired, I'm sure like you do, but they use a lot of quote marks. And if those quote marks truly are what was said, Nebuchadnezzar is showing that God is sovereign. See, what Daniel's saying to them is that you are not a God-fearing king right now, right? I don't know, that was some tough times back there in the Old Testament. People dying was not a foreign thing. And the amount of effort that a king, or the amount of power a king had to go out and slay thousands, was pretty regular. But it was very clear that Nebuchadnezzar, you may not be a man of God, but I put you where you're at. I put kings on the throne. I have a plan. You're a part of it, you just didn't know it. His sovereignty is sure. We studied, I don't know, it was probably about a year ago, I think, when we talked about the sovereignty of God, and a lot of questions about, does God have a hand in everything that happens? Does God have a hand in me standing here right now? Is he making my legs move? To what point does God come and say, okay, you got this part. You know how to walk. You got that. Does God have that amount of influence? Can he make me walk? Sure. But does he have an inner workings where he is making sure that every wheel, every cog, every gear is turning by his own hand? We're very clear in this aspect, in this chapter. Yeah. God just revealed not just the next month or two. He revealed the rest of the world, the rest of time. And as Adventists, as Bible scholars, we look back and we can clearly identify with every body, every part of that statue. We see it. Alexander the Great, Persian Empire. Reminds me of listening to my kids sing that song from their homeschool thing. What was the name of that song? The Timeline song. I learned more from listening to them sing this Timeline song that, you know how those things are. They run over and over and over again. I learned a lot about it. I am amazed that I'm a reasonably intelligent man, and please, if you disagree, don't say anything. You can tell me personally later. That in my mind, there was the Bible time and then the turn of the century, right? That everything happened before 1700 really was Bible time, and the only thing that happened in the Bible, and it was, Daniel, it was Joseph, it was to realize that there was a Persian Empire, something even greater, right? Something much larger, Alexander the Great. These things all happening at the same time. See, you kind of sometimes get compartmentalization, right? Kind of an idea that Bible and the rest of the world were mutually exclusive. But they aren't. And you're probably thinking, well, maybe he's not as smart as he thought he was, if you thought that. Maybe you guys think totally different. But you can get very indoctrinated into the Bible timeline and the rest of the world and assume that they didn't really intermingle. Here we're real clear that they intermingle. Bringing me to the final point, the will of God. I don't know what the will of God is for me. As we talked about in our study this morning, I'm a go-getter. I'm not very patient. I don't really shut down very much. Mentally, I'm always thinking, my wife hates this. I'm always thinking of the next trip. I'm always thinking of the next project. I'm always thinking of my next hobby. She loves my hobbies, by the way. If you ask her after the service which are her top 5 favorite hobbies that I have. That's really a joke. It's okay. She doesn't really like any of my hobbies most part, except the hobby where I listen to her. But I like to sail. I like to play golf. Matter of fact, she says your hobbies could be a full-time job, more than a full-time job, and more than our garage can hold. I don't know what the will of God is for me. I haven't slowed down long enough to figure it out, or actually maybe even to hear it. I don't know what peace is, and that's a problem. See, I envy people like Daniel, not for his knowledge, not for his, honestly, I don't know, I have admiration for his ability to control himself. But what I most admire and what I most long for is he had this connection with God that was unbreakable. Joseph had this bond with God that was unbreakable. They connected. As a nurse, it's part of my job to connect with my patient. I can do that. The easiest thing in the world should be to connect with God. And I struggle. because I'm a go-getter. God doesn't really want go-getters. He needs people that'll slow down and be quiet. God wants people who put the value of the relationship above and before everything else. And I struggle. Maybe you struggle. The will of God is equal to His sovereignty. It doesn't need me. I don't put God where He is. I don't put God on a pedestal. He is not the pedestal. He is not even on the pedestal. He is the base from which the pedestal sits. God is, period. He is everything. We have to, and I implore upon you, if you do not have a connection with God, if you feel like that you're struggling to find the will of God in your life, I would implore upon you to stop. God doesn't need you. He doesn't. He loves you. It's a very big difference. He loves you. All He wants from you is that you turn your desire to be with Him. Stop looking for His will. When He's ready, He'll be ready. When He's ready, you better hope you're ready. He has a plan. He had a plan. He shared it with Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel. He's real clear that He knows the beginning to the end. He's real clear that you fit in there somewhere. See, you fit in God's plan. You fit in God's will. God's will does not fit in you. And that's real hard for a go-getter to get. It's real hard to recognize that anything that I do really has no bearing on God's will. And I probably am not smart enough to mess up and be doing what God's will is without knowing God's will. I have to slow down and listen. I have to slow down and connect. He loves me. He always has. He always will. No matter what I do. No matter whatever kind of lemons I can create. He loves me. We're real sure on that part. And now all I have to do is stop moving. All I have to do is start paying attention. He does not have an inability to be heard. My kids, I love them. I love them very much. I have a relatively deep voice. I know that bass travels further. You know, bass actually has a tendency to move, right? Treble hits and dies. Bass goes on. I can hear their voices downstairs. I can actually hear the words they're saying. As a matter of fact, the reason why I'm calling them is probably because Lewis is doing something he's not supposed to, and I can hear him talking about it. And I can yell, and guess what? They can't hear me. They can't hear me at all. We live in a two-story. That's our intercom system. They don't even hear that. I'm 330, 340 pounds. That makes a lot of noise. I'm like my kids. God has a really deep voice. He's got a really loud kick on the floor, and I don't always hear him. I beg you, listen. You'll hear him. Go home this week. If you're struggling, you're trying to figure out the will of God for your life, stop and just listen. Find your connection. If it's on your back porch, listening to the river go by, get on your back porch. Wherever you last felt and saw God, go there. Wherever it is. and just listen. Pray and connect. He has a plan. He didn't need Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't need Daniel. He certainly doesn't need me. But he wants you to be a part of it. He wants you to feel fulfilled in being a part of his plan. He wants you to own your relationship with him. He wants you to come and meet him. He will meet you halfway. But like any good thing in life, it can't just be given to you. You got to want it. You got to go get it. So be a go-getter for God. Thank you.